Hey guys, so far we have seen the default parameters and in the functions and how we can use it with an expression. Now let's move one step ahead where we will see unnamed parameters and what is rest parameters. Well, so far what we have covered was fantastic. Now we've covered all the parameters which are possible, whatever are passed in the function. However, JavaScript functions don't limit the number of parameters that can be passed to the number of named parameters defined. You can always pass fewer or more parameters than formally specified. Now, default parameter value makes it clear when a function can accept fewer parameters. And es6 sought to make the problem of passing more parameters than defined better as well. Now, what are unnamed parameters? First, let's try to understand that from the history of it. So early on, JavaScript provided the arguments object as a way to inspect all the function parameters that are passed without necessarily defining each parameter individually. So you can assume that if the function calls like 4 parameters or 5 parameters, all those will be available in the argument. And that's what we saw in the previous example where we covered how the arguments were passed versus what arguments were passed. Now, once we know that the arguments are there while inspecting arguments, everything worked well for most of the cases. Now this object can be little cumbersome to work with because there's a lot of data, because you are not ever going to predict on what number of arguments will be passed to the function. So that's the need, that's where the rest parameters came into existence. Now a rest parameter, or as they call as REST, a rest parameter, is indicated by 3 dots, dot dot dot, and then of course the name. Now preceding by a named parameter. Now that named parameter becomes an array containing the rest of the parameters passed to the function, which is where the name rest parameters originated. So let's take an example and see what we can create out of it. So let me quickly show you how the rest parameter looks like. So you have a function. Let's say you want to create a function, and that function can be called anything that you want. Let's say my function. Now in this function, it can accept any number of parameters, A, B, C, etc. Now if you want to have as many parameters as possible, because A, B, C are defined parameters, let's say you're keeping the function open with any number of arguments, you'll give a rest, and then you can call my arguments or whatever the name you want to pass in. And then of course when you try to access it, you can see that now you have all number of parameters, which is A, B, C plus any which are passed to it. So you can call the function, let's say my func, and you can pass the value as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now this argument will have two values, which is, or an array which will have two values, which is 4 and 5, and then you can access that. So that's the whole concept of rest parameters, and that's the reason that you say these are the defined parameters and these are rest of the parameters that you can pass. Now there are two restrictions that come along with the rest parameters. So the first restriction that is there can be only one rest parameter for a function. And now if there is only one rest parameter, and it also has to be the last argument or the last parameter of that function. What is the second restriction? Well, the second restriction is that it cannot assign, or the value or whatever is the rest parameters cannot be assigned an object literal setter. So let's try to see. So if you have something called as, let's say my object, let's say object equals to something, and you have like a set name as a setter or whatever you want to call it, and when you try to pass in the rest parameter out here, it will not allow you. So these are the two restrictions that you need to follow. So let's create a function, and let's say this is add, and I can just give in my args as an argument. Now in this function I can destructure whatever arguments I'm expecting. So let's say I have an array that I'm expecting of 3, which is A, comma B, comma C, and I can say this is equal to whatever I get from my arg. Now whatever I get as in the A, B, C, I can just do a return of A plus B plus C. Now once I do that, let me quickly make a call to the add function. So the moment I do a add, let's do a console.log and of course an add. And once I do that, let me pass in the value of 1. You can see I will get a not a number, and the reason I get a not a number is because B and C are not defined, and that's why A plus undefined gives you not a number. Now if I do the same example and I do A, let me show it to you, 1, 2, 3, it should give me 6. You can see the answer is 6. Similarly, if I do something like console log of 1, 2, 3, 4. In this scenario, it will still be 6, but the fourth argument will be ignored because we are not returning anything out here. And of course, we are not even assigning it to a value d as well. Now let's see some more example to understand this much more better. So now if I don't do anything in the, don't return a sum or something, or don't return any of the arguments, and if I just do a myArgs.length, let's say myArg.length, and let's try to put it in a console log. Sorry, I'm just typing a little sloppy today. Console and my whatever arg.length, let's see what we get. And you can see the answer is 4. 1, 2, 1, 3 and 4. You can see 1, 3 and 4. So that's how you can also print the length of the arguments, or whatever is the array that is passed as a rest parameters. Now, as rest parameters is an array, you can use every function that is available for an array, like sorting, like map. And let me show you an example, in fact. So let's try to, uncomment this or comment this out so that we don't keep on printing it. Now let's try to create another function, and let's say multiply. Now if in this function, what I can do is I can first have a multiplier, and then I can do a rest arguments, and I can say these are the args. Now I can just do this. Now I can do a return of the args dot map, which means I'll iterate through the array that I have the arguments array. And once I have the array, I will just pass it to another function which will take the element as an input, and it will probably do a processing and return something as an output. So it will do a return of multiplier into the element. Okay. Now if you go and make a call to this, let's do a console.log. Actually, let's actually do a variable array is equals to multiply, and then let's pass the array that we need to pass. So first 2 into 1 comma 2 comma 3. So I passed in 3 arguments as a rest and 1 multiplier as a 2. So I did get something in the array. Let's see what that array says. So console.log, let's print the array out, and let's see what we get in the array. And as you expected, this is 2, 4 and 6, because the first parameter, its multiplier is 2. Then it iterates to the array and take the element as 1. So 2 into 1, that gives you 2. 2 into 2, that gives you 4. 2 into 3, that gives you 6. So you can very well use the map function for the array. Similarly, as I mentioned, you can also use the sort function. So let's see how you can use a sort function. Let me quickly just comment this out. I don't need to, move ahead with it. Let's do a function, say sort rest args. Now you can pass in the args out here, of course, the args, whatever is the argument. And you can just do a variable sorted arguments is equals to the args dot sort. And again, for all my JavaScript students, they would have intensively practiced how to use sort for an array. So this sort will work immediately the same way as you expect it to be for any array. So the rest parameters are treated as array. Now we return the sorted arguments. Similarly, if remember when we talked initially, we talked about arguments and how it will be. So ES also provides you with arguments. So you make use of that argument and try to apply this sort on it, and it will probably give you an error. So let's say I have a function which says sort my arguments, and of course I do not pass anything. I just expect it to be there as part of the arguments object. So I'll do the same thing, which is variable sorted arguments is equals to, now you'll use the arguments object that is passed to every function, and then try to sort it out. Now once you try to sort it, and you try to do a return of sorted args. Now let's make a call to both of these and see what happens. Let's do a console.log of sort rest args and try to give some parameters. Let's say I given 5, I will give you 3, I will give you a 7, I will give you a 1. So let's see what happens. You can see it got sorted to 1, 3, 5 and 7. Let me try to do the same thing for the arguments. I know this should not work. This should give me an array. This should give me an error, sorry, for the miscommunication. Arguments, and you can see Now when I do console log of arguments, I do not get any exception on the screen, but when I open my console, you can see the arguments.sort is not a function. And that's what we are trying to make a point, saying that when you use the rest parameters, it is treated as an array. And when you use the arguments object, which is passed to JavaScript functions, when you make a call, it's not an array and you cannot use the array functions on it. Okay. I think that was good enough lecture on how rest parameters work with functions. Of course, I will share this pen with you in the comments or probably in the resources section. So if you still have any questions, feel free to ask me, because rest parameters will come in super handy for you when you start coding in es6 projects. So I'll see you in the next class.